Hello, and welcome to this guide, which will cover 5 powerful lessons from some of the world's foremost thought leaders, namely Adam Grant, Brené Brown, Tim Ferriss, Angela Duckworth, and Daniel Pink. If you're not familiar with all those people, don't worry, you'll get to know them pretty well later on. As the great Albert Einstein once said, learn from yesterday, live for today, hope for tomorrow. The important thing is not to stop questioning. This sentiment beautifully encapsulates the essence of lifelong learning and growth that we'll be exploring today. So, what exactly is a life lesson? A life lesson is a powerful insight gained from experiences and challenges. It's the wisdom of others that can shape our own perspectives and choices, ultimately leading us toward a more fulfilling and successful life. In this guide, you'll learn from some of the world's sharpest minds, discovering how they navigated obstacles, overcame adversity, and reached the pinnacle of their respective fields. The 5 lessons that you're going to walk away with are, number 1, the art of changing your mind. Number 2, the courage to be authentic. Number 3, crafting a life of freedom, how to do that. Number 4, the power of grit. And number 5, understanding intrinsic motivation. Each lesson in this guide is a valuable gem that you can take with you, a little nugget of wisdom that you can reflect on and hopefully apply to your daily life. Now, that said, the exact application might not be apparent at this very moment. But don't let that deter you. Back in 2005, Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple, gave a speech at Stanford University. He discussed a calligraphy class that he'd taken when he was an undergraduate. Now, he couldn't have known it at the time, but that class would somewhat profoundly influence his future, helping to shape the design of the first Macintosh computer. So, what's the takeaway? Well, on the face of it, calligraphy and computers have nothing in common. The lesson that Jobs wanted to impart is that sometimes it's only later when we look back that we see how experiences have shaped us. So, even if you can't see how a certain lesson will help you right now, trust the moment. Pursue your passions, even when the outcome is unclear. Everything you learn today might end up making a meaningful and maybe even unexpected contribution to your life tomorrow. On that note, let's get into it.
Lesson 1. How to change your mind. How changing your mind can help you broaden your perspective and persuade people to your way of thinking.
I want to kick off this guide called Think Again. It's by Adam Grant, who's a renowned organizational psychologist and consultant. His insights are sought after by prestigious organizations like Google, the MBA, and the Gates Foundation. The science of changing your mind and also winning debates, all while having a blast in the process. As a highly esteemed professor and the acclaimed author behind New York Times best-selling books like Originals and Give and Take, Grant embraces the practice of arguing with conviction while still remaining receptive to opposing views. That's the changing your mind part. Have you ever been in a situation where you wished you could outsmart that stubborn family member at dinner or deal with that challenging coworker? Well, guess what? Becoming a better thinker is not the only answer, nor is becoming a better arguer. The real magic lies in mastering the art of changing your mind. So in this chapter, we're going to dive into the transformative ability of reevaluating our beliefs. By the end, you should find yourself equipped to win arguments and conquer various situations. Think Again is all about breaking free from unhelpful beliefs and embracing a mindset that values being open to new ideas. It's kind of like a little invitation to question our thoughts and feelings, not just accept them blindly. Instead of sticking with the same old rigid ideas, it encourages us to be curious, to stay humble, and also to acknowledge that there's a lot we still don't know. It's like upgrading from just knowledge to true wisdom. At least, that's the idea.
For most of us, our biggest blind spots are the things we're not good at. This might seem counterintuitive, but numerous studies have shown that the people who score the lowest on tests of logical reasoning and sense of humor, for example, also have the most overinflated view of their abilities in these areas.
The key message here is, you might not know what you don't know.
Worse still, when you falsely believe you're good at something that you're actually bad at, you're less likely to want to improve your skills. Take one study on emotional intelligence. It found that people who had the lowest emotional intelligence not only thought they were much more emotionally intelligent than they were also the least likely to want coaching to improve in this area. So what's the cure for our incompetence blindness? Humility. When you adopt a humble attitude and admit that there's a lot you don't know, you open yourself up to learning new things and becoming more competent. You might be afraid that adopting a humble mindset will undermine your self-confidence, but actually, humility and confidence aren't mutually exclusive. Confidence is about self-belief, whereas humility is about questioning whether you have the right methods. The most successful people are confident about achieving their goal eventually, but they also have the humility to wonder whether they're currently using the best methods to get there. Another way to illuminate your blind spots is to enjoy a good old argument. When we argue over who's right, we have the opportunity to change our minds and do things differently and better. That being said, it has to be the right kind of conflict. Relationship conflict involves not only disagreement, but also emotions and personal dislike, whereas task-based conflict concerns arguments over the strategy and methods you should use to get something done. During his research on Silicon Valley tech teams, the author Adam Grant found that the highest performing teams experienced moderately high amounts of task conflict, especially early on in their projects. This conflict was usually about how to best move forward. But importantly, the highest performing teams never had much relationship conflict. They all got along with each other, even when they clashed over how to get things done. In contrast, the lowest performing teams had low levels of task conflict but high levels of relationship conflict throughout their projects. The problem was they disliked each other so much that they never felt comfortable enough to challenge each other's ideas. How do you persuade someone that you're right? Grant used to believe that the art of persuasion consisted of reeling off evidence that the other person was wrong. But he's come to realize that there's a lot more to negotiations and debate than beating someone over the head with logic.
The key message here is, the best negotiators do 3 key things to change people's minds.
First, they find common ground with the other person. Most of us enter debates and negotiations like a tug of war. We think that if we can hit our opponent with enough reasons why we're right, then we can drag them over to our side. But the most skilled negotiators approach the debate more like a dance. They know that by stepping back occasionally, it gives the other person room to step forward. So, whereas mediocre negotiators only arm themselves with reasons why they're right and the other person is wrong, the best negotiators also mention things on which they might actually agree. So the next time you enter a negotiation, remember that you don't have to win every battle. Agreeing with some of your partner's arguments and finding common ground will actually encourage them over to your side. Second, great negotiators also achieve more with fewer arguments. We often imagine debates to be like standing on opposing ends of a pair of weigh scales. If you can weigh your side with enough arguments, you tip the scales and win. But the best negotiators don't just pile on arguments. Instead, they present fewer, stronger arguments in favor of their case. That's because they know that weaker arguments dilute stronger ones. If you pile on lots of reasons to support your arguments, then your opponent will simply discredit the weakest ones. And once they've rejected some of your arguments, it's much easier for them to disregard your whole case. For instance, when a group of researchers set out to persuade alumni to donate money to their old college, they found that only half as many people donated when they were given 2 reasons to donate as they did when they were given just 1. Third, whereas mediocre negotiators act like preachers and prosecutors, the best negotiators behave more like, you guessed it, scientists. Instead of just preaching their own viewpoints or mercilessly prosecuting their opponents' positions, great negotiators show a scientist-like curiosity toward their opponents. They ask questions such as, Are you really saying you can't see any truth in my proposal? In fact, research shows that the best negotiators end 20% of their comments with a question. That's twice the number of the average negotiators. As strange as it may sound, sometimes the best way to get people to rethink is to interview them. In 2018, in a hospital in Quebec, Canada, a young mother named Marie-Hélène was refusing to change her mind. Marie-Hélène was an anti-vaxxer, and she didn't want her premature baby, Toby, to be vaccinated against measles. The staff on the maternity ward knew there was only one person who might be able to help. Enter Dr. Arnaud Gagnard, the vaccine whisperer, whose work holds powerful insights into rethinking. In his work with Marie-Hélène, Gagnard used a technique known as motivational interviewing.
The key message here is, you can persuade someone by asking them the right questions.
Motivational interviewing is effective at getting people to change their minds on everything from vaccinations to quitting smoking to getting more exercise to stopping gambling. So how does it work? It all starts with the idea that it's much more effective to help people discover their own reasons to rethink rather than simply giving them your reasons for a rethink. The interviewer begins from a position of humility and honest curiosity about why the person thinks the way they do, and explores what might motivate them to change their mind. So Gagnard began his interview with Marie-Hélène by asking her open-ended questions about her feelings surrounding the measles vaccine. Then Gagnard moved on to ask her how she felt about the potential consequences of not getting Toby vaccinated. Usually, when we're trying to persuade someone, we do a lot of the talking. But motivational interviews emphasize listening instead. When he was talking to Marie-Hélène, instead of jumping in to disagree with her, Gagnard acknowledged that he understood her fears about the vaccine. This simple acknowledgement of another person's view and feelings is known as reflective listening. At the end of the interview, Gagnard emphasized that Marie-Hélène had complete freedom to choose whether or not to vaccinate Toby. When people refuse to rethink, it may not be because they disagree with your arguments. Instead, it's often because they want to hold on to their own freedom to choose. So it's important that you let the person know that they're capable of change, but that they're also free to decide for themselves. After the interview, Marie-Hélène decided to vaccinate Toby and her other children too. No persuasion required. In 2006, Al Gore released his award-winning documentary on climate change, An Inconvenient Truth. It had a seismic effect, persuading governments, businesses, and ordinary people to start protecting the planet. But 15 years on, how successful has the environmental movement been in changing America's mind on climate change? Perhaps not as successful as it could have been. By 2018, only 59% of Americans viewed climate change as a severe problem, and 16% said they didn't think it was a problem at all. So what can the mixed success of climate activists teach us about getting people to think again?
The key message here is, people rethink less when an issue is presented as black and white.
Activists like Gore often frame the climate change debate as if people must agree with one of just two sides. On one side, you have scientists and the truth, and on the other side, you have climate deniers and their wild claims. But if you want people to think again, then this black and white approach doesn't work. By framing issues like this, we fall into the trap of binary bias. This is when, in our quest for clarity, we simplify a complex range of viewpoints into just two categories. In fact, most Americans aren't firmly on one side of the climate debate. Many people's views range from mildly concerned to disengaged to skeptical. But by making out as if it's simply truth-tellers versus deniers, activists force people to pick a side. It turns out that people are more likely to change their minds when an issue is presented as complex, as having many different perspectives. In other words, if you want someone to rethink, it's no good telling them that they're either wrong or right. Instead, you're better off showing them that there are lots of opinions to choose from. This approach encourages people to focus less on the emotional, irrational business of picking sides and more on the actual issues. If environmentalists had managed to do this, then more Americans might have focused on the science rather than the sides. Of course, you might be worried that you'll appear weak or unsure of your position if you admit that there are multiple perspectives on an issue, but research shows that this isn't something you need to worry about.
Alrighty, welcome back. So let's recap the key life lessons that we just learned. So lesson number 1, the first lesson. You might not know what you don't know. If you're a millennial like me, you might remember former Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld talking about known knowns and known unknowns. Well, we're in the realm of unknown unknowns. The Dunning-Kruger effect highlights how individuals with lower skills, or really lower self-awareness, may overestimate their abilities, leading to quote-unquote incompetence blindness. Recognizing and embracing humility is crucial for personal growth, allowing us to be more open to learning. So keep in mind that sometimes you don't know what you don't know, so don't always assume that you know. Okay, second lesson. You can persuade people by asking the right questions. Dr. Arnaud Gagnard, the vaccine whisperer, uses motivational interviewing to help parents make informed decisions about vaccinations. This approach, which involves asking open-ended questions, allows individuals to reflect on their feelings and motivations. Also, reflective listening, an essential part of motivational interviewing, involves acknowledging the other person's views and feelings, which creates a supportive environment for rethinking. And lesson number 3, avoid presenting issues as black and white. Al Gore's approach in An Inconvenient Truth, another film that you may have seen in theaters if you, like me, are a millennial. Now, while impactful, that film framed the climate change debate in a binary way, leading to polarization. A more effective approach would have highlighted the complexity of the issue. Presenting climate change as a multifaceted challenge, acknowledging different viewpoints, and focusing on scientific evidence can lead to more productive conversations and greater understanding. By incorporating these 3 lessons and examples, you should be able to navigate personal growth, persuade people effectively, and contribute to fostering organizational cultures that are both adaptive and innovative. At least, that's my hope. Okay, now that you have a solid overview of Adam Grant's teachings, let's move on to the next chapter.
Lesson 2. Embracing vulnerability. Brené Brown's valuable lessons on how to live more authentically, embrace failure, and reckon with your emotions.
We're going to be exploring the invaluable teachings of Brené Brown. I'm sure you've heard of her. She's a distinguished author and a research professor, and she became super famous, absolutely blew up after she gave a TED Talk on vulnerability, which you've probably seen, actually. It's one of the most watched in history, with over 20 million views. Since then, she's published 6 #1 New York Times bestsellers, each of which explores the complex world of emotion, from courage to vulnerability, shame to empathy. Her work has transcended language barriers and transformed countless lives. So in this chapter, we're going to dive into one of her most famous books. It's called Rising Strong. We're going to be listening to part of that book, the part that's all about resilience and personal growth. I hope serve as a compass for bouncing back from failure and emerging even stronger, braver, and kinder. It's got relatable stories, actionable advice. It's really for anyone, and it should empower you to grow, connect, and build a life that reflects your true self. Okay, so get ready. We're going to dive into the inspiring world of Brené Brown, a true powerhouse among thought leaders with a world of wisdom to offer.
Rising strong starts with accepting risk and being willing to fail. Time and time again, we find ourselves in situations that require us to take risks in order to learn. Whether it means appearing unprofessional when plunging into a new leadership position at work, or being uncoordinated in front of our exercise class, learning by doing often leaves us feeling quite vulnerable. Risking vulnerability in this way and failing can be tough. We may feel ashamed, discouraged, or even decide never to leave our comfort zones ever again. But keep in mind, the best place to learn is outside the comfort zone. So it's vital that you're able to recover from failure. How? By rising strong. Rising strong is a multi-step process that can help you risk vulnerability and emerge with confidence. Rather than presenting a strict formula to be undeviatingly followed, the basic principles of rising strong, which you can adapt to your own life. Before diving in, though, there are 3 things that ought to be kept in mind. Firstly, you've got to commit to failure in order to rise strong. This means accepting that you are likely to fail multiple times, but bravely agreeing to give your all nevertheless. Secondly, remember that you aren't the only one experiencing failure. While we can't ask other people to make our mistakes for us, we can ask our peers for advice about the learning process itself. And finally, know that rising strong won't just change your life. Your experiences of recovery after failure can actually have a profound impact on those around you, whether you're aware of it or not. In this way, rising strong is incredibly powerful. Want to get started? We'll investigate how rising strong actually works. The process of rising strong is divided into 3 steps: the reckoning, the rumble, and the revolution. So, how does one actually go about rising strong? Well, it works differently for everyone. To get you started, this blank presents a rough map of the 3 core steps of the rising strong process, based on the experiences of people who have found ingenious ways to navigate dangerous waters. The first step of the process is the reckoning. What does this entail? Well, people who rise strong are willing and able to reckon with their emotions. When something happens that triggers an emotional change in them, they take care to recognize and acknowledge this shift. Then they take an interest in why it happens and exhibit a boundless curiosity toward the unique connections between their emotions, thoughts, and actions. The rumble is the second step in rising strong. Rumbling is all about keeping a critical eye on your own understanding of your struggles and weaknesses. What stories do you tell yourself about times when you have suffered? If you revisit, challenge, and reality check these narratives, and are willing to dig deep into topics such as shame, guilt, heartbreak, or forgiveness in order to learn more about yourself, then you are doing a fine job of rumbling. The third step of rising strong is the revolution. This occurs when you take the insights gained from rumbling with your stories and channel them into positive changes in your life. Unlike evolutionary change, which happens little by little, rumbling can create a sweeping, radical shift in the way you live, love, lead, parent, and participate in society. Sounds like something you'd like to experience yourself? Let's explore each of these steps in detail and see how we can integrate rising strong into our own lives. Reckon with your emotions by both acknowledging and investigating them. Know those people who seem to just roll with the punches? The ability of certain individuals to simply dust themselves off and keep on fighting despite the odds is a bit mystifying. But if we take a closer look, a pattern begins to emerge. These people all share one central trait: the ability to reckon with their emotions. You can learn to do so too by taking 2 steps. The first is recognizing your emotions, a task that's often more challenging than we realize. Why? Because we've trained ourselves to refuse the existence of our own feelings. When a sense of disappointment or anger washes over you, you might find yourself trying to bury the emotion with rational thoughts or distractions. But this is futile, as we can't just dismiss our negative emotions. If we try to do that, they accumulate and fester within us, often leading to explosive breakdowns later on. So how can we avoid this? By giving ourselves permission to feel. Literally. The author once wrote herself a physical permission slip saying, "Permission to be excited, have fun, be goofy." Once you've recognized and accepted something you might be feeling, it's time to get curious about it. This makes up the second step of reckoning with your emotions, where you investigate what's going on inside you and why. It starts with asking yourself simple questions. For example, why am I being so harsh about everybody around me today? What's bothering me? Research has shown that curiosity goes hand in hand with creative problem solving. So if you want to uncover clever solutions for your problems, start inquiring.
Hey there, welcome back. So let's recap the 2 key lessons that we just heard in Rising Strong. Lesson number 1. Embracing vulnerability and the possibility of failure is absolutely essential for growth. Learning often involves stepping out of your comfort zone, and it's crucial to recover from failure by, well, rising strong, which can be a multi-step process. Lesson number 2, recognizing and investigating your emotions is a fundamental aspect of rising strong. By reckoning with your emotions and maybe even questioning the stories that you tell about your struggles, you can gain valuable insights into your behavior, which will enable further growth and self-understanding. Okay, let's move on to Chapter 3.
Lesson 3. The 4-hour work week. Is it really possible to have a 4-hour work week? In this guide, Tim Ferriss teaches you how to take control of your time.
So, just so you know, we are now about halfway through this guide, 2 chapters down and 3 more to go. Thanks for sticking with me so far, and I hope you stick around to the very end. In this chapter, Chapter 3, we're going to be entering the captivating world of Tim Ferriss, and more specifically, the 4-hour work week, where we're immersing ourselves in the lives of the quote-unquote new rich, the people who've liberated themselves from the grind of the office to craft lives centered around the joy of the present day. If you're eager to embrace this lifestyle, and let's face it, who wouldn't be? Sitting back in a hammock with a cocktail sounds better than getting up at 7 in the morning and going off to the office for yet another 8-hour day. Well, the first step is to turbocharge your productivity and find a continuous, mostly hands-off income source, which is exactly what you're going to be hearing about in the 4-hour work week, which we'll listen to in just a second. So that book's author, Tim Ferriss, is an absolute rock star in the investment world, and he's also a go-to advisor for tech startups. He's the mastermind behind the incredibly popular podcast series, The Tim Ferriss Show, and he's been instrumental in the success of companies like Uber, Facebook, and Alibaba. So, yes, I know the idea of a 4-hour work week might sound like a utopian fantasy, but it's actually not totally unattainable. According to Ferriss, there's a systematic approach that anyone, including you, can follow to achieve it. So if you're ready to get down to work, let's explore the transformation of 40 hours into a mere 4. All right, so you're working 40 hours a week. Maybe you're working even more than that, and you're constantly exhausted. You're constantly stressed, and you'd give anything to extract yourself from this situation, from the daily grind. But it feels like you just can't. You're stuck in your job. You need your job. And as promised, there is a recipe for escaping the 9-to-5. There is a formula. And that's exactly what we'll be exploring in the 4-hour work week by Timothy Ferriss. But before we get to the formula, let's talk about where you're escaping to and how Tim Ferriss, the author, got there himself. Okay, the goal. So the goal is to become a member of the new rich. What's that? Well, the new rich is a subculture characterized by mobility and financial freedom. They're tied down by nothing. They decide where they go. They decide what they do. See, they've realized that the right moment to live your dreams, to really live your life, is now. It's easy enough to say, but how do you do this? How do you live your dreams? How do you live your life to the fullest right now? Well, here's something else the new rich have realized. Basically, you only need 2 things to accomplish this. You need more freedom and more free time. See, what most people associate with millionaires, things like extensive travels and extravagant hobbies and maybe a butler, essentially add up to 2 things: more freedom and more free time. And you can have those things without having millions of dollars in your bank account. So that's the goal. Get more freedom, get more free time, and join the new rich. Tim Ferriss, the author, got all of these things kind of by accident. Back in 2004, he was in a situation that, might be similar to yours. He was overworked. He was exhausted. He was actually so overworked and so exhausted that he suffered a burnout and had to take a break. But this break turned out to be a blessing. During his time off, he traveled around the world and realized that he could run a profitable business from wherever he was, and that he could do it with minimal effort. And just like that, he joined the ranks of the new rich. Okay, I know it sounds like magic, but really, it's not. Remember, if you want to live a life of luxury, all you need are those two things: more freedom and more free time. They are the only prerequisites for the ability to do whatever you want to do, whenever you want to do it, and from wherever you want to do it. And neither can be achieved by working a standard 40-hour week. So let's get to that formula. It's the formula that Tim Ferriss used, and it'll give you all the freedom and all the free time that you could ever wish for. Okay, the formula. So the formula is called DEAL. The DEAL formula. That's DEAL, DEAL. And it stands for definition, elimination, automation, and lastly, gloriously, liberation. So let's start with D, definition. Maybe you noticed this, but we've already started creating some new definitions. We've already begun to redefine wealth. Remember, living the life of a millionaire isn't about having millions of dollars in the bank. It's about doing the things that millionaires do. In short, being wealthy isn't about having tons of money. It's about the ability to do the things that people with tons of money do, like spending months on a gorgeous tropical island, or going skydiving whenever you feel like it, or even just having more time with your family. So, wealth equals activities, your ability to do the things that you want to do. It's about freedom and free time, not the amount of money you've accrued. Another word you need to redefine is happiness. Most people would say their goal in life is to be happy, but what exactly does happiness mean? Well, according to the author, the opposite of happiness isn't sadness, it's boredom. So the best definition of happiness is excitement. To truly be happy, you should dedicate your time to doing things that excite you. Now, for the author, this meant traveling, becoming a kickboxing champion, and setting a world record in tango, among many other impressive things. For you, it might mean something completely different. But the point is, buying a house, having an impressive job title, retiring with millions in the bank, none of this will bring you happiness if you're not excited by what you're doing with your life. So, since happiness isn't some far-off goal, something that you'll only fully experience when you have enough money or enough things, and since wealth isn't about having massive piles of cash, the question is no longer how you can earn as much as possible, but how you can free up as much time as possible. Time in which you can do all those things that excite you. And this is where the E in the DEAL formula comes in. That's E for elimination. All right, folks, it's elimination time. So if you're anything like the author once was, then roughly 80% of your work output results from a mere 20% of your effort. This is called the 80-20 principle, and at work you may not have noticed it because it's hidden by the standard 8-hour workday. See, most employees have to work for 8 hours a day, and so instead of focusing on productivity, they emphasize activity. They organize their inbox, they futz around with their phone, they walk self-importantly from cubicle to cubicle. And the person who looks the busiest often gets the raise because at most companies, time spent at work is the only yardstick for performance. But here's the thing. About 80% of that activity is useless. Spending a lot of time on work doesn't necessarily mean that you are addressing the right tasks, nor that you are doing them well. Quite the opposite, in fact. Actually, the more time we have to complete a task, the more time we'll spend on it, a tendency known as Parkinson's law. So if we have an hour to turn in our project's final report, we'll finish it in an hour. But if we have the entire afternoon, well, we'll take the entire afternoon, all 4 hours of it. So what you have to do is pinpoint and then prioritize the 20% of tasks that will yield 80% of results. And this means eliminating all tasks and activities that don't bring you closer to your personal goals. Okay, but how can you identify these crucial tasks? Well, go through your list of to-dos and, for each task, ask yourself, would I be happy if this task ends up being the only one I complete today? If the answer is no, then it's a candidate for elimination. You should especially be on the lookout for interruptions, things that prevent you from completing important tasks from start to finish without pause. Now, perhaps the most costly kind of interruptions are time wasters. A time waster is any task that you can ignore without negative ramifications. The most common ones are surfing the web, responding to unimportant emails, and conducting phone calls and meetings. Now, all time wasters can and should be eliminated, but let's just focus on some tactics for eliminating one of them: email. A good way to start weaning yourself off email is to read and answer messages twice a day, once in the afternoon and once in the evening. If you can manage that, then hey, why not go a step or two further? See if you can't deal with email only once a day, or even just once a week. As you do this, keep your friends, family, and coworkers in the loop. You can do this by setting up an auto-response explaining that you're limiting the time you spend on email in order to serve them better, and that it may be a while before you respond. Those around you will adapt and learn that most messages can simply wait in your inbox or your voicemail while you tackle truly important things. If a request is actually really urgent, people can always call you or take you aside for a face-to-face conversation. By letting many small questions and tasks accumulate in your inbox, you'll be able to deal with them all at once, which will both save you time and liberate you from the interruptions that interfere with more important work. Okay, right. So all these pointers should significantly improve your productivity. But they don't exactly add up to a 4-hour work week. So if you want your daily routine to include more lounging in a hammock on a remote island, cocktail in hand, then you'll also have to free yourself from the location your work binds you to. So it'd be pretty hard to find someone who wouldn't want to spend only 4 hours a week working, right? If you found yourself nodding along and thinking, yes, this is what I want, then let's just quickly recap the key points on how you can actually make the shift toward a 4-hour workweek lifestyle. So number 1, focus on activities that excite you and provide freedom and free time. Start by identifying what truly brings you joy and fulfillment. Number 2, understand that wealth isn't just about money, but it's about the ability to do what you want when you want to. Prioritize experiences and time over material possessions. Key takeaway number 3 is to increase productivity to accomplish more in less time. You can implement strategies like the Pomodoro technique or do time blocking and eliminate distractions. In order to really make this shift effectively, it's essential to have a clear plan. You also have to have dedication and a willingness to adapt. Continuous learning, networking, and seeking mentors or experts in the field can also provide some valuable guidance. Now, just remember, it's a journey, so go easy on yourself. Progress may take time, but the goal is to gradually transition from the traditional 9-to-5 model of working to a lifestyle that offers more freedom, fulfillment, and the opportunity to pursue what you love. And finally, I asked you to keep an ear out for this. What do you think of the 80-20 principle when you compare it to your current professional life? To leverage the benefits of the 80-20 principle, you have to identify the crucial 20% of tasks that deliver the majority, 80%, of your desired outcomes. This prioritization is absolutely crucial for genuine productivity. And simultaneously, it's vital to address and eliminate activities that don't align with your overall goals, as these time wasters can significantly hinder your efficiency. Keeping all this in mind, I've got a little task for you. I want you to grab a pen and paper and create your own personal 80-20 principle. Or if you'd rather do it on your phone, I've included a tool in this chapter where you can do the same thing. So here's what you're going to do. You're going to list your job responsibilities, then try to identify the vital 20% of those responsibilities and highlight the tasks that also fall within the 80% range. This will help you eliminate distractions, tackle email overload, and boost overall efficiency. Okay, I hope that exercise is helpful for you, and I'll see you in the next chapter.
Lesson 4. The power of grit. Grit, the combination of passion and perseverance, is the key to long-term success. But how do you cultivate it?
We're going to dive into the powerful concept of grit with the renowned psychologist and author of the New York Times bestseller, Grit, Angela Duckworth. Duckworth emphasizes the significance of passion, perseverance, and determination in achieving long-term goals. Her work has had a substantial impact on education, business, and personal development, inspiring many individuals to embrace grit as a pivotal element in attaining excellence. Have you ever found yourself maybe giving up on goals or struggling to make lasting changes in your habits? Many of us have. Well, Angela Duckworth suggests that the missing ingredient might be grit. And the good news is that it's something we can develop. We can all become a little bit more gritty. Duckworth explains how cultivating grit can enhance our resilience, empower us to achieve our goals, and even improve our parenting skills. This chapter is somewhat different. We're going to be listening to the Elevate Shortcast with Robert Glazer. He's the host. But before we start listening and get into the gritty details, I want you to try to think of a personal goal that maybe you gave up on a little bit too easily. After the shortcast, we're going to evaluate Angela's grit method and how you can maybe apply it to your once abandoned goal. Okay, this shortcast is 13 minutes long. I'll turn it over to Robert and Angela.
Hey, I'm Robert Glazer, and welcome to the Elevate Shortcast, where I chat with some of the world's leading performers about achievement, personal growth, and pushing limits in leadership and in life.
I think closing the gap between the aspiration of who we want to be, which are really our values, and what we do in our daily life is, one of the big projects of living, right? And the people I respect most are the ones where their values and their actions are actually closer, not farther apart.
Have you ever given up on one of your goals, failed to change a habit, or maybe quit a project too early? What you may have been told is that you were missing grit, that elusive quality that gets you to the finish line. So to find out how you and I can hone in on this valuable skill, I'm speaking to Angela Duckworth, CEO of Character Lab, professor at the Wharton School of Business, and author of the New York Times bestselling book, Grit. So when I think about grit, I'm always reminded of the concept of sticking with a long-term goal across all of the ups and downs. And for us, deciding to launch our business globally was a great example of grit. It took many years and a lot of mistakes and learnings, but we were convinced it was a key strategy for our business, so we wanted to see it through. And now global is the single fastest growing part of our business. But sometimes grit can be a tricky idea to pin down. We associate it with physically tough characters who just keep on going despite being knocked down. But grit is not unique to action heroes, as Angela will explain. It's something that each and every one of us can cultivate, not just in ourselves, but also our children and those around us. So to hear more about how that works and what grit can look like, let's just jump into the interview.
Angela, welcome. I'm excited to finally have you on the Elevate podcast.
Thank you.
So, how do you define grit?
So I define grit as the combination of passion and perseverance for long-term goals. So if you want a one-word definition of grit, it's stamina. The idea that you would commit to something for years if you're an adult. I mean, obviously, if you're talking about little kids, it's not quite on that time frame, and that you would pursue those goals with passion and perseverance.
And what sort of led you to the interest in resilience or grit, as the book came to be called?
I think a lot of the research interest I have in resilience and effort, grit in particular, which is sticking with a goal for years and years and staying not only committed to it in terms of like what you want to do, but actually behaving in ways that advance the goal. So, really doing the work as well. My interest in all of that, I think, came largely from being a teacher. So in my experience as a classroom teacher, I got to see what happened in a daily way when kids showed up and tried to do hard things like learn algebra. And I thought, well, it's going to be about ability. It's going to be about how smart they are, and math's hard. And I came to see how incredibly important consistent effort over a year, for example, would be to your grade point average at the end. I mean, how well you would do. So I think for me, my interest as a psychologist comes from being an educator.
So one thing you've probably seen a lot of, one of my favorite topics, and I'm sure you have strong opinions on this generation of helicopter parenting, or now snowplow, I was told by one teacher. It used to be hover. How does this intertwine with what you see with grit and resilience, and also intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation?
The research on parenting is pretty definitive in its most useful conclusions, which is that there is a style of parenting that's better. And it really has 3 ingredients, but I'm going to simplify it by combining 2 of them into the same ingredient. So one is warmth, that your kids really feel loved, that you're the center of their universe, that they know with conviction that your greatest aim in life is to make sure that they are happy and well. That comes, I think, very easily to most, if not all, parents. There's a part of this that gets to the snowplow and helicopter problem, which I do think are problems. And that is a part of being supportive, which is called autonomy support, which is a little jargony. But autonomy support refers to really respecting your kids. For example, if your kid wants to start a nonprofit education program, and you think that's a horrible idea.
Not go to med school, for
example. Not go to medical school. Yeah. Yes. What autonomy support would look like in that case, Dad, is saying, I hear that you want to do something different and I don't agree, but I respect your decision. So those are 2 aspects of what scientists would call being a supportive parent. And the third is demanding. A great parent is not only supportive, but they're also demanding. Now, was it helpful for my dad to compare my English essay from middle school to like Nobel Prize-winning literature? Probably not. But I think the idea that you could grow up in a family where, you're always expected to try to do better the next day, that there's never any kind of like permanent resting on laurels. Like, yes, you got the ice cream and celebrate that you won your softball game, but that doesn't mean that you're not going to like work hard and practice the very next day to get even better at softball. So these are the 2 ends of a continuum. And in my data on grit and these motivational, sources, I find definitively clear signal in the data that people who are really gritty, who pursue long-term goals with passion and perseverance, are intrinsically motivated, not extrinsically motivated. And I know it sounds obvious maybe, but I will tell you how, after I give this whole talk about grit and how it's important to actually care about what you're doing, and then I have a parent who stands up and their question is like, well, how do I get my daughter to play more piano? She only practices 4 hours a day. And I was like, well, does your daughter want to play piano? Does she want to play it better? And the parent is looking at me like, why does it matter? And I'm thinking to myself, like, hello? Yeah. So I think this intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation thing is exactly on point here, Robert. Like, should they be caring about what you think and what you want, or should they be really trying to be excellent at what they care about themselves? And I think there's a world of difference between those.
Since a big part of grit is goals, I want to talk a little bit about identifying the right goals.
Okay, so my favorite scientist on this kind of goal science is Gabrielle Ettingen, and she is a psychologist at NYU. And she spent her whole life working on how people set and plan for goals. And her technique has 4 steps. The first step is you just state without anybody telling you like what your current goal is. The second step is you ask yourself, why? What is the outcome that will happen if I achieve this wish? Right. So you think, well, if I get an A in my calculus class, oh, my mom will be happy. Okay, that's extrinsic motivation. If instead you think like, if I get an A in this calculus class, I'll feel proud of myself. That's more of an intrinsic motivation. So in that second step, you can start to identify extrinsic versus intrinsic sources of the motivation. And then the third step is, what is the obstacle that stands in the way of you achieving this wish? Why are you not yet getting an A in calculus? When you do that kind of accounting, you can then enter the fourth step of the process, which is making a plan. When you identify what the most important outcome and the most important obstacle are, you can first of all decide whether you still want to keep that wish or reject it. And then if you really want to do it, you can make a plan. Okay, when it is 4:00, then I will do my calculus homework. So this is a 4-step plan. She calls it WHOOP because the acronym is wish, outcome, obstacle, plan. And I think it is the synthesis of not only lots of research, it's what both makes sense, but also is not commonly what people do. They sometimes go right to the plan. They sometimes don't think about the obstacle. They sometimes don't think about the outcome. And I think it's really elegant and practical work. And I think that's the way to identify intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation as well.
Well, that ties to 2 other traits that I was going to ask you about that I know you talked about related to grit. So one is optimism. How do you teach grit to pessimists? And then 2, in your research, I think you've talked about how people who are gritty do not spend time on the decision made last week or what might have been or looking back. I'd love to hear a little bit more about those 2 topics.
So let's start with optimism. My advisor, Marty Seligman, was famous for his work on optimism. And what Marty figured out in over 50 years of research is that, there is an optimistic way of explaining, especially bad events that happen to us. And there's a pessimistic way of explaining why bad events have happened to us. The optimistic explanations are explanations that point to causes that are temporary and specific. Like, oh, I did terribly on that calculus exam. I didn't study enough for that calculus exam. The permanent and pervasive explanation is pessimistic. Yeah. I'm an idiot.
Yeah.
Like, everything I do is ruined, right? And Marty was a clinical psychologist by training. So for a lot of his early work, he was trying to understand the psychology of depression. And he came to the conclusion that at the heart of this disorder was the bias, these like permanent, pervasive explanations for bad things. And how it relates to grit, as Marty and I discovered in our first or second year of working together, is that optimism is correlated with grit. So people who are gritty, who pursue things over long periods and don't give up and get back in the game even when they fall down, these are people who, as a bias, have an optimistic explanation, especially for negative things that happen to them. So that, of course, relates to growth mindset, which I'm sure a lot of your listeners are acquainted with. But all of these ideas have to do with like thinking about your world and your life and your experience in ways that, draw your attention to things that can be changed.
I'm so glad we made this happen. Thank you for joining in and sharing your story. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, not only for this conversation, but I really have enjoyed your writing and your insights. So I look forward to reading and thinking more with you.
Talking to Angela offered amazing insight, not just into how grit actually manifests itself, but also how we can cultivate it in ourselves and others. Whether you're a parent or not, we can all learn from Angela's belief that intrinsic motivation is far more important than external motivation in steering someone towards achieving their goals. Of course, Angela isn't recommending that you take a complete hands-off approach when raising children. Instead, you can instill a sense of resilience within them, encourage them to challenge themselves and their endeavors, but ultimately, you must help them towards a path of their choosing and not yours. So thank you so much to Angela for helping each of us develop a bit more grit, and thanks to all of you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to hear more from this show, you can hit follow on the show page to stay connected.
Hey there, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that. So, as you just heard, this shortcast aims to clarify the significance of grit, its cultivatability in individuals, and also its pivotal role in achieving lasting goals. I decided to include this shortcast because I wanted to provide you with some valuable insights into the concept of grit and its practical application for personal and professional growth. I hope that I was successful. Now, I also want you to be able to adapt the insights that you just heard into your life, so let's review really quick the key points. So first off, what is grit? Let's define grit. Grit is the combination of passion and perseverance for long-term goals. It entails committing to a goal over an extended period and pursuing it with unwavering dedication. Then we had intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. Gritty individuals are intrinsically motivated. They're driven by genuine interest or the personal reward that they get out of doing something, the enjoyment of it. Extrinsic motivation, on the other hand, is relying on external rewards or even punishments, and it's far less effective in fostering grit. Next up, parenting and grit. Now, as anyone who's a parent out there knows, effective parenting involves a balanced approach of warmth, giving your child love, autonomy, support, kind of letting them go out and do their own thing, and also being demanding. You have to make rules and create boundaries. Encouraging children to pursue their interests and develop passion and perseverance is crucial. You want to help them develop grit at an early age. Then we had goal setting. The WOOP process, love this one, WOOP process, which stands for Wish, Outcome, Obstacle, Plan, can really help us identify the right goals. It's an approach that distinguishes between intrinsic and extrinsic motivations, leading to effective goal setting and planning. Finally, optimism and grit. If we define optimism as attributing negative events to temporary and specific causes, then there's a correlation between optimism and grit. Gritty individuals often possess an optimistic outlook, which enhances their resilience in the face of challenges, whatever those challenges are. All of these points emphasize the significance of nurturing intrinsic motivation, setting meaningful goals, and maintaining an optimistic perspective to cultivate grit and achieve enduring success. Okay, that's it for this chapter. Now it's time to move on to the penultimate chapter, Chapter 5, where you'll meet our final thought leader, Daniel Pink.
Lesson 5. What drives you? Why the carrot and stick method doesn't motivate us, and how to be driven by the things you really want.
Okay, hey there. Welcome to Chapter 5. First off, just great job. You made it pretty much all the way through this guide, and I know we've covered a lot of material, so again, thanks for sticking with me. The final book that I want to introduce you to, if you haven't read it already, is called Drive. It talks about the prevalence of the carrot and stick approach for motivating people within organizations. And I like this, the book argues that this method is fundamentally flawed. And another good thing, it offers a more effective solution by igniting engagement through tapping into the psychology of intrinsic motivation, which, as we just learned, is the way to go when trying to motivate anyone, including yourself. So, a little bit about the author. Daniel Pink, he's a scholar with a background in linguistics and jurisprudence. He's authored several bestsellers, including A Whole New Mind, To Sell is Human, When, The Power of Regret, his latest, and also, the one that we're going to be hearing, Drive. So, yeah, as we just learned in the shortcast with Angela Duckworth, gritty individuals are motivated by intrinsic things. They like doing the thing that they're doing, or they're passionate about it. It comes from within. The reward comes from within. And this is a good thing. This is something that we want. But unfortunately, within many organizations, even to this day, intrinsic motivation remains elusive, and extrinsic motivation, that is, motivation that's driven by rewards or by punishments, continues to dominate. So our final listen, and again, we're not going to listen to the whole thing, just the most important ideas, and it's going to take about 10 minutes. We're going to explore the reasons behind this phenomenon, why extrinsic motivation continues to prevail, And we'll try to uncover why intrinsic motivation is not the prevailing reality in the workplace, even though we know it's a good thing. All right, I hope you enjoy, and I'll see you in about 10 minutes.
Human motivational systems of the past are no longer compatible with present realities. Human societies are like operating systems. Think about it. All the activities and interactions in which we partake on a daily basis are predicated on a bedrock of protocols, instructions, and rules. These take the form of social conventions, motivations, and human behaviors, from politeness to keeping promises. In prehistoric times, human behavior was motivated purely by survival as we ate, slept, copulated, and defended ourselves from external threats to endure as a species. This form of human behavior can be termed Motivation 1.0, and for a time served humanity well. Then came Motivation 2.0, which revolved around extrinsic drives to do things. As humanity slowly formed itself into societies, cooperation became key to social progress. This meant no more stealing others' food or spouses. Instead, people would have to work together efficiently to be rewarded with an asset like money or honor. If not, they would face punishment. And Motivation 2.0 has done humanity well over the millennia. So well that it is still a vital element of our human behavior, particularly in the workplace. Businesses incentivize employee performance by rewarding good work with promotions and raises, and punishing the opposite with demotions and terminations. However, the world is changing, and with it, the factors that drive us to do what we do. And in this new world, Motivation 2.0 just doesn't cut it anymore. Take free open-source software such as Firefox, for example. What were the external reward punishment incentives for the volunteer programmers who created this, one of the world's most popular pieces of software? Or the tens of thousands of volunteer Wikipedia editors who contribute to the free online encyclopedia? In today's world, intrinsic motivation is more important than its extrinsic cousin. Open-source programmers and Wikipedia editors are motivated to contribute their free time purely because they enjoy it. Instead of working for an external reward, they pursue the joy of mastering challenges and giving back to others in the community. And intrinsic motivation isn't only important in your free time, but in the workplace too. The creative, complex, and increasingly self-directed jobs of today require more than the wealth-maximizing reward-punishment incentives that Motivation 2.0 entails. In fact, in the modern workplace, extrinsic motivators can even result in lower productivity and performance. Although Motivation 2.0 works for some tasks, it doesn't for others. You've probably heard the phrase carrot and stick used in the context of getting people to do things. If the cart driver dangles the possible reward of a carrot in front of a reluctant horse, he might get the horse to move. Alternatively, he can punish the horse's reluctance by striking it with a stick. The carrot and stick approach constitutes a form of extrinsic motivation and still has limited uses in today's workplace. One area where this approach works is in the context of routine algorithmic work, such as cashiering at a grocery store or delivering flyers. In jobs that don't require a lot of creative thinking or problem solving, performance can be increased via the possibility of reward because there is little enjoyment or intrinsic motivation to be gained from the job in the first place. In an MIT study, for example, 3 groups of participants were assigned cognitive and mechanical tasks, each group being promised the equivalent of either a day's wages, 2 weeks' wages, or 5 months' wages on successful completion. For the mechanical tasks, such as repeatedly throwing tennis balls at a target, the groups that had been promised the highest compensation performed the best. But for cognitive tasks, such as unscrambling anagrams, the opposite was true. Those in the 2 lower earning groups performed better than those faced with the possibility of earning 5 months' worth of pay. This anomaly boils down to the simple fact that when you focus on the reward offered by completing a complex or creative task, your attention is diverted away from the process of tackling the creative problem itself. Intrinsic motivation is thus crushed under the weight of the carrot. The same conclusion was drawn from a highly cited study conducted on a group of preschoolers who enjoyed drawing. Researchers divided the children into 2 groups. One was told they would receive an award for drawing, the other wasn't promised anything. The researchers found that the children who were expecting an award demonstrated less motivation to draw and spent less time drawing than the other 2 groups. Their enjoyment of drawing had been replaced by working toward the award. Their play had become work. Sadly, this carrot and stick approach is still the dominant method of incentivizing employees in the workplace today. But this research shows the counterproductive effect of reward and punishment. So a new method of incentivizing must be implemented to allow employees and companies to thrive. Motivation 3.0. To increase autonomy, employers need to upgrade management systems to Motivation 3.0. When we look at the economy of developed countries today, we can see that the increased automation is making many routine jobs, like being a grocery cashier, obsolete. Similar jobs are also being outsourced to developing countries where production is cheaper. The jobs left over in the developed world, therefore, increasingly involve creative cognitive work as opposed to algorithmic repetitive tasks. And we need an upgraded operating system to match our upgraded economy. The carrot and stick approach of Motivation 2.0 simply won't cut it anymore. This is where Motivation 3.0 comes in. Motivation 3.0 isn't so concerned about offering rewards or punishments for activities. Instead, it's about producing satisfaction and enjoyment from the activities. And the behavior with which Motivation 3.0 works best is Type 1 behavior which cares more about self-satisfaction than carrots. Type 1 behavior is something that can be taught. It all hangs on 3 characteristics: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Let's start with autonomy. In a nutshell, autonomy revolves around our inherent wish to be self-directed, whether in our personal or professional lives. But autonomy doesn't only involve us having freedom over what sort of work we do. It also means having the freedom to choose when, and even where, we do it. Take Medius, an American healthcare company founded in 2006. CEO Jeff Gunther was an early adopter of the ROWE, or Results-Only Work Environment, system. ROWE workplaces allow employees to work whenever they want, and for as long as they want, on the condition that they get their work finished. After a trial period where he implemented ROWE company-wide, Gunther was astonished. Not only did his employees' productivity increase, but their stress levels also sank. The results were so unambiguous that he decided to implement ROWE permanently. Similar strategies of increasing employee autonomy were successfully implemented at Australian software company Atlassian, founded in 2002. Co-founder Mike Cannon-Brookes, worried that his company would stagnate like many other startups, decided to encourage his employees to take one day every quarter to work on anything they wished. Again, the policy's success was unquestionable, so much so that Atlassian has now upped these FedEx days to once a week. At the end of the day, organizations that offer their employees autonomy, whether in small or large doses, are much more likely to outperform the competition.
Okay, welcome back. So, as you just heard, Pink presents some pretty compelling evidence that traditional external incentives, the carrot and the stick, extrinsic motivations, fall totally short when it comes to motivating individuals. And he encourages a shift toward creating an environment where people are driven by their inner passions and the desire for excellence. Okay, that's the quick version, but before we go into the final chapter where we'll wrap everything up, let's just do a quick recap of the key ideas. So, intrinsic motivation, right? It stems from personal enjoyment and passion. It emerges from within and is driven by inherent satisfaction. It's tied to autonomy and a sense of purpose, and it also results in higher commitment and a deeper sense of satisfaction, which who wouldn't want these things in the workplace, especially if you are a manager or a leader. And then there's extrinsic motivation, which relies on external rewards or punishments. It's when our behavior is driven by external factors, and it's often associated with financial rewards, praise, or recognition. Now, it may lead to compliance, but it lacks genuine enthusiasm and can diminish intrinsic motivation over time. Final point. Intrinsic motivation prevails over extrinsic motivation when it comes to getting people to perform. It's more sustainable in the long term because intrinsic motivation empowers autonomy and self-direction. It's also connected to genuine commitment and satisfaction, making it more effective for meaningful and creative tasks. So, win-win all across the board. Now, if you are an adult listening to this, then it's pretty likely that you are employed somewhere by someone. So, I'd invite you to ask yourself or just give it a quick think, Are you mainly guided by intrinsic or by extrinsic motivation in the workplace? And if it's the latter, how could you maybe make it a bit more of the former? Okay, with that, let's move to the final chapter where we'll recap everything one more time and say farewell. All right, you did it. You reached the very end of this guide. Again, thanks for sticking with me. In this chapter, I just want to run through those 5 lessons that I mentioned at the very top. I think they are the most important ones and what you should take away if you were to boil this guide down just to 5, as kind of advertised in the title. Here they are. Number 1, the art of changing our minds. You'll remember Adam Grant's Think Again. It showed us the remarkable potential of reevaluating our beliefs, right? The skill of staying open to fresh ideas, of engaging in constructive debates, and of embracing the practice of adjusting our viewpoints is a powerful tool for personal growth. And it can enrich our interactions with other people along the way. Lesson number 2, the courage to be authentic. You have to be brave enough to be yourself. This comes from, who else? Brené Brown. She teaches us about the importance of vulnerability and authenticity. Embracing our imperfections, building connections through shared experiences, and cultivating resilience, these things enable us to lead more fulfilling lives and establish meaningful connections with others. Okay, lesson 3, crafting a life of freedom. Now, the 4-hour work week, it might sound impossible, a utopian dream, but if you do it right, you can break free from the traditional 9-to-5 grind. It is possible. By focusing on your true passions, implementing productivity strategies, and creating passive income streams, you can create a life centered around memorable experiences, personal fulfillment, and growth. And come on, that's the dream. Lesson number 4, the power of grit. Angela Duckworth's concept of grit highlighted the significance of passion and perseverance in achieving long-term goals. The ability to bounce back from failures, to maintain a positive mindset, and to prioritize determination is essential for achieving success, both personally and professionally. Keep that in mind next time you feel like climbing back under the bed covers or throwing your hands up in despair. With a little bit of grit, you can probably break through to the other side. Okay, lesson number 5, understanding intrinsic motivation. This is part of grit, but drive takes it just that little bit further. Recognizing that genuine enthusiasm arises from personal enjoyment, autonomy, and a sense of purpose is absolutely crucial. By relying less on external rewards like a pay raise and fostering an environment that values autonomy and mastery, you can unlock lasting commitment and satisfaction, not only in yourself, but if you're a leader, in others. These are the 5 lessons that I think are most important from these thought leaders. Taken together, you get a roadmap for growth, for forging meaningful connections, and for living a purposeful life, and also for breaking through when the going gets kind of tough. If you can put these lessons into practice, then you'll be able to nurture genuine enthusiasm, foster deep relationships, and also steer yourself toward a more fulfilling and impactful existence. In the meantime, thanks so much for listening, and I hope to see you in the next guide.